Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
A star in Rio and a star in Tokyo. Once rejected by many swim clubs when she was a lot younger, Toronto native Penny Oleksiak began a new era of Canadian swimming. At the age of 16, she won 4 Olympic medals in 2016, 3 more in 2020, and those 7 medals have Oleksiak as this country's most decorated Olympian. But all of a sudden, a 2-year punishment, a suspension for an anti-doping violation, even though Oleksiak maintains she's a clean athlete. So what's really going on here? What are these whereabouts failures that Oleksiak has been struck with? And now at the age of 25 and with the LA Olympics in about 2.5 years, could this be the last we see of Oleksiak as a competitive swimmer? I'm Alex Seixeiro, and today on The Big Story, we're speaking with Toronto Star columnist Bruce Arthur to discuss what's next for one of Canada's greatest swimmers. Bruce, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure, Alex.
So this story really began in July of this year. Oleksiak withdrew from the World Championship in Singapore. She said she was involved in a whereabouts case with World Aquatics. So let's start by discussing what these whereabouts failures are. And we learned back in November that she was struck with 3 of them in a 12-month period, and that's what comes with this 2-year suspension that Oleksiak has accepted. So let's break it down. What exactly did she do wrong here, Bruce?
So the last time Penny Oleksiak swam, it was at the national trials in Victoria for the World Championships. That was the nationals where Summer McIntosh has an unbelievable meet, right? 3 world records in 5 days, 2 near world records. Incredible. Penny made the team in the 50 and 100 freestyle for the Worlds in Singapore. And she was seen still at the age of 25, and 25 is not young for a swimmer, as an essential part of the relays. Because one of the things with Summer McIntosh is she can put Canada in the position to win a ton of medals, but right now she's only winning the individual medals. Canada's relay teams aren't strong enough. That's where Penny was actually seen as really important. But as part of the World Anti-Doping kind of protocols under the World Anti-Doping Agency, it's really important, and this is something that every athlete has to do. You have to give the testers a window, a 60 minutes every day, where you will be in a place where they could test you. Now, this sounds onerous, but it's actually not that bad. It's due in the summer. Swimming Canada, I've talked to them about this over the years. They will, 3 weeks before the deadline, they will contact everyone who's in the pool and say, okay, this is what you have to do. You have to give them a schedule for the year. And swimmers are among the most scheduled athletes on the planet. There are very few sports that demand more of you than swimming, and that we'll get to that a little later when we talk about Penny's career. So you enter all this information, and if you haven't entered it, by the way, a week before the deadline, Swimming Canada will call you back, and then they will text you, and they will call you, and they will eventually, Swimming Canada make sure everyone's got their information in, and Penny had her information in. Now, you can still change. This is important. You can still change your window up to an hour before it happens, right? So like you have an app on your phone, so like a whereabouts app, and you just have to keep up to date, right? And this is a basic tenet of being an international athlete in the world today. Everybody knows it. Everybody does it. And some people mess up, right? But messing up once doesn't get you a ban. Messing up twice doesn't get you a ban. Messing up 3 times in a 12-month span, which is what Penny Oleksiak did, that gets you a ban, because in the history of doping in international sport, dodging the testers, people literally scrambling out windows and jumping off balconies, there's a long and inglorious history of that in sports. And so Penny Oleksiak's 3rd violation was right after the trial. So the last day of the trials, they introduced the whole team, and they all walked down the pool deck in Victoria one by one. And the only one who wasn't there is Penny Oleksiak, because she'd gotten on a plane and flown to Montreal for the F1 race because she had sponsorship duties with Red Bull that she didn't want to miss. And according to sources that I talked to, that is where she was supposed to be, in California at the time. And that's her 3rd whereabouts violation. And that's something that she could have foreseen, that she was going to be in Montreal. Literally, WADA's in Montreal. This probably didn't have to happen, but it did. And as a result, she didn't have really a lot of arguments against a 2-year ban.
So, Swimming Canada has called these failures a few things: inadvertent errors, an administrative mistake, and I believe there have been athletes in the past who this happens once or a few times, and they try to get this suspension reduced. And I believe there have been some cases where the suspensions have been reduced. The fact that she just accepted the 2-year ban, what does that tell you?
I mean, there's a lot of questions about it. One, I don't think she had any argument. I really don't. Two, there are people who will. So there's a lot of this comes down to kind of who Penny is. Penny Oleksiak's had a very complicated relationship with swimming. When she wins those 4 medals in Rio, no Canadian, by the way, had ever won 4 medals at a Summer Games before. Nobody had ever done that. Nobody's done it since. Or actually, sorry, Summer McIntosh did it in Paris. It was a remarkable achievement, but she did it. And a lot of people in swimming have talked about this over the years. She did it without putting in an enormous amount of work. She wasn't even supposed to be on that team. A year before, at the World Junior Championships, she was probably the 3rd best Canadian swimmer of the really young swimmers who might make the Olympic team. She didn't think she was going to make the Olympic team. She makes the Olympic team. She wins 4 medals, 2 individual, a gold and a silver, and 2 relay. And between 2016 and 2021, which is when the 2020 Olympics were held because of the COVID pandemic, so that Tokyo, they moved them a year, Penny had real trouble sticking with swimming. Part of it is because she became a celebrity really young. And that was something that turned her head a little bit, according to the people who knew her. Part of it is she kind of rebelled a little bit against coaching, specifically against then national team coach Ben Titley. And it's surprising to some people that she got back to the Olympics at all. And the extra year of the pandemic may have actually helped in that regard. And since that Olympics, even then, she's had injuries and she's had a complicated relationship with swimming. But when she talked at the National, she sounded really happy about it. And she sounded like she wanted to keep swimming. There are some people who wonder whether or not she just wanted an excuse to let go of the rope. I don't know that at all. But in this case, it just sounds like she didn't have an excuse. I will say this. I am really skeptical when it comes to excuses, when it comes to anti-doping, because we have, in the sports world, moved from innocence to experience on that. And we've seen it all. There is not a whisper, and there's no evidence in terms of performance, I would say, and not that that's definitive, that Penny Oleksiak was involved with performance-enhancing drugs. There's just nobody has even whispered that in the conversations I've had with people in swimming. What they say is this was Penny being Penny. And whatever that means, it means at the end of the day, it's a 25-year-old with a 2-year ban, which means she can't get back into competition until just before the Olympics. I talked to Byron McDonald, the swimming guru at the University of Toronto, who's been the CBC commentator for years. He says you need about a year of competition before an Olympics in order to really be competition ready for an Olympics. So everyone in swimming would be shocked if she gets there.
And to be clear, there has been no retirement news or anything from
No.
Penny Oleksiak. But as you mentioned, there's I don't know if saying there's a lot of gray is the right way to go about it, but there's a lot of speculation because there's, I think, a lot we don't know at this point. What we can say is when she withdrew from the Worlds, she put out a brief statement suggesting that she was not doping and that she's a clean athlete. I don't believe we heard from Penny since the 2-year suspension was handed down and accepted. Do you think it would be wise for her to come out and say something, or maybe for Swimming Canada to be a little more in depth with what happened here? Because even the statements from Swimming Canada didn't really say a whole lot.
Yeah, no, and her last I checked, her Instagram profile was down as well. That's something where she had a significant number of followers, something like 130,000. She probably should say something. Swimming Canada, I don't think can say much more than they've said, which is that this is, as far as they know, and not an anti-doping issue. I will say this: Swimming Canada is, in addition to all that stuff I talked about earlier, they redouble their efforts with swimmers once they've missed one, right? Or once they've missed 2. because they know they're on the edge, right? So after Penny had missed 2 whereabouts, she was getting reminders. That's what I was told anyway.
Yeah.
So how does that fall apart? I don't know, man. I will say this as well. When I said that there's no sport that demands more of its athletes than swimmers, that also means that there's no sport that kind of handles its athletes more than swimmers. You take a look at a typical swimmer's day, they might have an hour and a half to themselves where they're not eating, recovering, exercising, or sleeping. And that happens over years. I talked to Kylie Mass at the Nationals. Kylie Mass is like the captain of the team. She is someone people look to for advice. She is like a den mother for a lot of the younger swimmers. She's someone that people really respect. And Kylie said she'd taken much of the last year off because she wanted to figure out what she liked to do in life. Think about that for a second. And I said, well, what do you like to do in life, Kylie? She's like, well, I like to cook. I like to hang out with my friends. She's 29 years old, right?
Yeah.
Swimming, a lot of these swimmers, they don't learn what it means to be organized necessarily beyond kind of the basics of where they need to be every day. And Penny was someone who didn't even like that. One of the things she said about her coach in California, she loved that she didn't have to be there every day. She got to choose, which was kind of indicative of her complicated relationship with the sport.
I could speak on, I was in London for the 2012 Olympics, and what you mentioned about swimmers just being extremely busy, at least, the aquatics events are always the first week of the summer games. And I was at the aquatic center for the first week in London, and at least speaking to some of the Canadian athletes down there, you're right. They really have very, very little time for themselves. Let's talk about WADA and this drug testing system, because some are going to hear this and say, wow, high-profile athletes, have to give their schedule to the World Anti-Doping Agency in 3-month chunks. And like you said, they have to be available essentially for an hour each day to be potentially randomly drug tested. So, there's an app and you put your schedule in and, life gets busy and there could potentially be a mistake. Maybe you didn't update something, that's one violation. You could see how that would happen. 2, maybe 3, you kind of start to question, right? But the way they've gone about it has been challenged by many people. It's even gone as high as the European Court of Human Rights, where it was upheld. But clearly, Bruce, WADA believes this is the best way of keeping tabs on athletes potentially doping. What do you make of the way that they kind of track their athletes to make sure everyone's clean?
It is by definition an imperfect system, right? There's no way to be sure that athletes can be clean. That's if you there's some people who don't even think there should be an anti-doping program in the world, right? But if you accept that we want clean athletes, or as clean as they can be, you need a system in which the ways that they evade drug testing are limited, right? Not eliminated, but limited. And this is one of those ways. So if you read The Secret Race about the Lance Armstrong teams in the Tour de France, there was an 8-hour window where they couldn't be tested during the race. Midnight to 8 a.m. or midnight to 7 a.m., whatever it was. There was a window. And they calculated, some of the teams, Lance's team specifically, exactly how much of a performance-enhancing drug they could take, microdose, where their glow time, the time that they would test positive in a test, would kind of evaporate by the time that window was over. So however much of whatever the drug was, they would put in 7 hours worth, for lack of a better term. This is the kind of stuff why it's imperfect, but it's also why you need the ability to threaten random tests at any moment, because every performance-enhancing drug that you put in your system that is in the database can be detected within certain windows. And so that's why this exists, right? It's the same with, it's a similar version of ideally you'd do the biological passport where you'd be monitoring the vitals of athletes over periods, but that's impossible logistically
Right.
and privacy-wise. They do it during the Tour de France. And that's how Lance Armstrong got caught, actually, the biological passport. But it's just, this is, if you want to be an international athlete, this is a prerequisite. People will help you with it. You can change it until the last moment. It sounds onerous, but like, this is part of the deal.
Yeah.
And I will say that I don't think anyone was surprised when Penny fell afoul of it, because she was just not in the most disciplined place in her life, I would say.
And some will look at the 3 violations and say, well, this is an easy story to figure out. She was clearly evading the drug testers because she's, on performance enhancers. But Swimming Canada and Penny Oleksiak are very clear that is not the case, and she's a clean athlete. But I think it's really intriguing at this point. Like you said, she's 25, which is not terribly young for a swimmer, but she's still 25 years old. Not retired. As you mentioned, it could be extremely hard for her to make the 28 Olympic team in LA if that's something she wants to do. But I think now we don't have any choice but really to potentially look at possible legacy here of a 16-year-old who won 4 Olympic medals, then 4 years later won 3 and has 7 total. But how much do you think this will complicate her legacy if this is indeed the last time Penny Oleksiak is a competitive swimmer for this country?
I will say, if she's found to have taken performance-enhancing drugs, and again, there is no evidence of this, nobody credible is saying this right now. Again, we're skeptical, but nobody's saying this. Then her legacy changes. Absent that, if this just turns out to be a mistake that essentially ends her international swimming career, I think her legacy is still intact. I really do. One thing about, when I went to this World Championships, I was at the World Championships in Singapore. And this is something I've noticed in swimming over the years. By the time a swimmer is 25, I've had swimmers tell me, if you don't say you hate the sport by the time you're 25, at least for some period of time, then tell me the secret. Swimming is so demanding. And so you get athletes retiring at 22, 23, 24. Ariarne Titmus, the Australian, the great swimmer who just won medals in Paris, retired after this World Championship. She didn't even go to this World Championship. She's 24, I believe. For Penny to get to 25 and still be a competitive swimmer is no small thing. But the other part is this. It's not just the 7 medals. She's tied with Andre DeGrasse as the most decorated Canadian Olympian ever. DeGrasse has 2, she has 1, whatever. It's that she changed the way Canada looked at swimming. I'm old enough to remember that 2012 Olympics you talked about. 1 medal, Ryan Cochran.
Mm-hmm.
We used to go into Olympics and in swim meets, and Swimming Canada would never, ever consider a best case scenario. They would only consider a worst case scenario when it came to medals. And Rio's where that changed. And we had a generation of swimmers at that time. Kylie Mass was entering her prime. Maggie McNeil. We had enough of swimmers that all of a sudden Canada's winning relay medals. And that's why Penny gets to 4, not 2. But she wins a gold medal in the 100 free. She wins a silver medal. And then comes back another Olympics, wins another individual medal and 2 more relay medals. That is a great accomplishment in international swimming. Go take a look at the list of career medals in international swimming. It's not as many as you'd think for the vast majority of swimmers. That's why Summer McIntosh is so exceptional, because if she wins 5 golds in LA, which is possible, all of a sudden she's got 8 gold medals. She's starting to knock on the door of like one more Olympics like that, which is no small thing. She could have more individual Olympic medals than Michael Phelps. This is such a hard sport. So I think her legacy is she changed the way Canadians looked at swimming. Byron McDonald said the same thing. I've had other people tell me the same thing, is that Summer McIntosh was out there watching during that Olympics, and it helped propel her to where she is today.
Yeah.
Right? That is an unbelievable legacy. It was a great moment in Victoria where Summer had just finished, I want to say, her 4th or 5th race, and she'd just come off, and Penny was on the pool deck, and Penny picked her up in this giant bear hug. It was a really lovely moment, because it really felt like the final passing of the torch between them. It had already happened, but really that was the end. Penny Oleksiak should be remembered as one of our greatest Olympians, basically, no matter what happens. The only thing that could really complicate that is proof that she did take performance-enhancing drugs, which we don't have right now.
Well, just like in 2024 in Paris, Summer McIntosh was must-watch television. In both 2016 and 2020, you kind of found time to be in front of a television set anytime that Penny Oleksiak was competing in a heat, a semi, or a final. I don't think this is the last we will be hearing of this story, but Bruce, we really appreciate your insight and your coverage of this story. Thanks for joining us today.
Alex, it really was my pleasure. Thank you.
And that was The Big Story. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this conversation. Send us an email at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or reach us on Instagram @frequencypods. If you know someone that might enjoy this episode, be sure to send it to them. You can listen to The Big Story every day on the Seeker app or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Alex Seixeiro. Thanks for listening.